looked, and behold, the heavens were opened. A ninth season.
We believe in the Trinity. We believe in the five solas. We believe in the doctrines of grace.
Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Matthew 4:4.
A lot of the time, people are asking the wrong questions. They're not asking the questions like, do I understand God's grace? Do I understand the cross?
Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. Colossians 3:16.
Every single one of us has our own ministry. Doesn't matter if you work as a CEO or you work at McDonald's or whatever you do, or whether you're quote unquote in ministry, you have a ministry.
As we mature, we walk, we enjoy our relationship with God in as much as we see his majesty in the blessings that we have, just by what Yeshua has done for us, not by what we have done to impress God and then get something from him.
So faith, so salvation by faith.
Absolutely. Salvation by faith. I keep zeroing in on these, the big ideas, like what is biblical love? What is grace? Do I have an accurate understanding of God's grace? Our love for Yeshua, but his love, like through us, is why we're doing what we're doing. And that's why it's called Messiah Matters.
Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022. This is Messiah Matters number 377. Slow and steady today. My name is Caleb Haig.
Knowing why he's slow and steady, I don't know if he's going to give the reveal, but I'm Rob Vanhoff.
There was a time, one time, I was at the Society of Biblical Literature, and I interviewed a very prominent scholar. I'm not going to mention the scholar because I don't want him to be upset if it ever gets out. But he revealed to me after the interview that he had just had knee surgery and was very, very loopy on pain medication. And I currently understand his state of being at that point in time.
You had knee surgery?
No. I did have surgery, though. I had oral surgery.
Ouch.
So, I know. Yeah. But you know what? That's okay. I'm feeling slow and steady. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. Welcome, everyone, to the show. And we have a last-minute show put together. But guess what? It's going to be a good one, I think. I want to welcome everybody that's in the chat room. I also want to bring up our producers. Let's do that first. There are our producers. And we got some emails this past week asking when our next producer credit is going to drop. And the reason why, let me shut this just a little bit. The reason why is because we actually didn't have a winter producer credit. And that's okay. We were going to do a T-shirt.
I think it was due to global warming. No, I'm sorry.
That's right. No, it's it is what it is, and that's totally
so
fine.
Bad.
We're not worried about it, but we are excited that people are themselves excited to get the next producer credit.
Everything you're saying, I'm totally thinking that of like Percocet is doing the talk. So
there you go. Yep.
It is what it is.
Hey, that's what happens when people rip teeth out of your mouth. But that's okay. Yeah. All right. Now that our producers are off the screen, 253-465-3205. It's 253-465-3205. And if you forget that, just sing the song.
Messiah Matters wants to hear from you. Leave us a comment, a question or two. Call 253-465-3205.
You can also
that
shoot
doesn't have the
shoot us an email, chegg@torahresource.com. It's chegg@torahresource.com. And actually, that is the reason that we have our topics today, is because people have written us emails. Also, don't forget to check out torahresource.com. Oh, that's Messiah Matters. MessiahMatters.com is where you can find all of our past shows. And, of course, torahresource.com is where you can find all sorts of great resources, including free articles, books, videos, all sorts of stuff. So go there and check that out. And finally, last but not least, please do subscribe. And if you are already subscribed, please press the like button. Somebody asked me this past week, why press the like button? Well, I'll tell you why. Because YouTube has what's called an algorithm. And the more likes you get, the more shares you get, the more subscriptions you get, the more they actually share your video. So the reason that it helps us for you to subscribe and to like the video is because it will actually then put it in front of more people, and the more people it's in front of, the more likes it'll get. All that kind of stuff.
And the more hate mail we will get. No.
Yes, exactly. Actually, we got, so Bobby in the chat room says,
if you don't like us, like us.
Yeah, exactly. So Bobby in the chat room says, I just called for the first time today. I got your message this morning, Bobby. Thank you for that. And we will probably talk about that next week. I did not have time to put that in the rotation. So patience, my friend, patience. Let's go back to our,
thanks, Bobby.
Let's go back to our old friend, Nelda Bell. Nelda wrote in again, and she says this. She said, now, when I say our old friend, for those who have not been with us for the past, 3 or 4 episodes, Nelda Bell has been has had something said on this program through email for the past, I think, 3 episodes, and she's got some great questions and some great comments, and so we're going to keep going. This one, and this is kind of going to be a theme because we actually have 3 different things.
Plus her name, come on, face it. Her name's fun to say.
Nelda Bell, that's right. But we have 3 different comments on the Sabbath. And so she's going to kick us off today. She says, good morning, Rob and Caleb. So work friends have been listening to your shows. Oh, thank you.
That's better than a like.
Yeah,
Nelda.
that is better than a like.
That's better than clicking like, I'm telling you. You can do both, but
you can do both. Okay.
Tell them to click like.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so she says, work friends have been listening to your show and are wondering, how do people, pastor and priest, keep the Sabbath when it is their jobs to work on the Sabbath? This is a great question. So David talks about the fact that the priest, he works on the Sabbath, right? Is it David? No, it's Paul. I forget. Anyway.
Well, Yeshua cites the example of David getting the bread, the showbread, which was on a Sabbath, because that's when they pull the bread of the presence out.
Right.
Put the new one in and eat the bread that's been in the Mishkan for the whole week.
But even the priests continue to work on the Sabbath. I think that's
right. Yeah,
that's cited by Christ. I could be wrong. And then also pastors. And I know Rob has too. We've ran into this dilemma. You want to keep a Sabbath, but if you are pastoring any kind of a congregation, you are working on the Shabbat. That's all there is to it. We get to our church usually about an hour before we start, and then we usually are last ones out. And so for us, it's not a 3-hour event. It is a 5 to 6 hour event, which is most of the day. So all of that to say, yeah, it is work. So what do we do with that? Well, there's a couple of things to say about this. Number one, obviously, if it's commanded by God, then it is it's permissible. So the priesthood obviously has to continue to work on the Sabbath. And the rabbis, not that the rabbis are always right by any stretch of the imagination, but the rabbis have determined that any kind of work in terms of studying the Bible, preaching, worshiping God, that's all permissible on the Sabbath because it's to the glory of God. And I tend to side with that I believe that pastors are doing something that needs to be done, and so are people in the choir, so are people, deacons, so are the ushers. If you go to that kind of church, there's all sorts of different jobs that take place that need to be done on the Sabbath, and that's permissible. Now, with that said, I am a firm believer that pastors and, of course, priests, which we don't have today, but I don't believe we have today, pastors should take another day off. So I think that it's important to actually have a rest day with the family. And some might say, well, you get to rest at church or at your Messianic synagogue or whatever. But once again, doing that for long enough, I know that it's not really rest. It's draining. After our church on Saturday, we will come home and just kind of collapse on the couch, just exhausted. What do you have to add to this conversation, Rob?
Yeah, it's another example in the Torah. Like there's what's called the tamid, the olat tamid, which is the daily burnt offering, which means every single day there is a lamb at morning, whole burnt offering, meaning they have to select the lamb. It's got to be inspected because it has to be tamim, right? It has to be without blemish.
Right.
They have to slaughter it. I mean, I don't know if any of our listeners here, I'm sure some have lived on a farm. They know what's involved in slaughtering an animal. Well, every day in the morning, it's got to be skinned. The carcass has to be parsed up. It has to be placed, rinsed, placed on the altar. That's in addition to the wood. It has to, they have to keep the fire going. And then they have to do that at the end of the day. So the daylight hours are marked by that every single day. Well, on the Shabbat, God says, add another one.
Yeah, do more.
So
don't just do that, do more.
So there's 2 in the morning and 2 at night on Shabbat. Right. Male lambs being slaughtered. So you could even say, just on the level of what we call the olah, the olat tamid, it's not just work is the same, that work doesn't cease. There's work that actually increases. And so what are we to learn from that? Does the nature of the work of God's servants for the sake of the flock,
right?
Does that desecrate the holiness that God has declared concerning the seventh day from creation? I say no. It's part of that priestly service for the glorification of God.
Now, what you just said, in my opinion, I think that common work is really what the Torah is talking about. So
exactly.
When we say you're not to work on the Sabbath, that doesn't mean that you're not allowed.
You're trying to make a profit with your business. That's why business owners, you're supposed to we shut down the business.
Actually, in the chat room, Promised Land says something interesting. He says, and I don't want to put anybody down here, but I am going to push against this just a little bit. He says,
"What's he named that?"
That's the handle that he's
I'm
using.
Kidding.
What does what does Jewish Orthodox community do on Shabbat? They seem to have a better take on it than we do. I would disagree with that, and here's the reason why. Here's the reason I disagree with that. We are to do things that are to the glory of God. I'll give you an example that would be completely against any Orthodox community. There was a young woman who was in desperate need of diapers and food and other things that my wife and I learned about one day. And it was a Sabbath. And we went out and we bought her a huge amount of groceries. Now, that's not to build ourselves up, but she was out of diapers and she had 3 kids at home. And so we felt that it was more important to spend money on the Shabbat, to go into a store and spend money on the Shabbat and give it to this woman who is in need, a single mother, than it was to uphold the idea of not buying on Shabbat. And I think that we have precedents for that in the Torah, and we have precedents for that in the apostolic scriptures. Any Jewish community would say, no, you're not allowed to do that. You don't do that. You can't do that. So, and we even see this with Yeshua. He's healing on the Sabbath, right? And it's not necessarily a matter of life and death, but it's a matter of human comfort in terms of healing. He's healing somebody. And so all of this to say, I think that the Orthodox community is looking more at the letter of the law. But I think that as believers, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to understand that what the Sabbath is actually for is the glorification of God as a community. During the week, we are to glorify God in our work. We're to glorify God in our families. We're to glorify God. It's an individual and family glorification of God throughout the week. On the Sabbath, we come together as a community and we glorify God as a community. That's what we're supposed to do. Thoughts? Keep going. Sorry, I kind of cut you off, Rob, and I apologize.
That's good. Yeah, I think that back on the, I would just, it's my standard Vanhoff caveat or whatever, is that we can't imagine that there is a monolithic orthodoxy in the Jewish world. Because I think if I heard it correctly, it's like the they versus we. And I'm not comfortable framing my identity as a believer in terms of us and them. So it's just a personal thing. I pursue, a little more nuance. And so I would say, I would want to acknowledge that even if you dove in to the Orthodox world, you're going to see differences between groups doing things that other Orthodox groups say, those guys, that's why we're not part of them, because they do the A, B, and C. And they're all nitpicking over interpretation of halakha. And it has nothing to do with the conversation we're having. It has to do with almost competitive stringency in some ways, like who can be the most stringent.
I'm better.
And I can see how people
Rob.
People who are coming new maybe in the Christian world who are seeing value in the Sabbath might look and just get like a website from a Jewish rabbi or something and go, oh, they look at the way they honor the Sabbath. There's the famous book by Abraham Joshua Heschel, The Sabbath. And that
excellent book, by the way.
Yeah, it's a great book. I've talked to Mormons who love that book. Yeah. Right. That book has it's reached all sorts of different faith people because it causes people to reflect on the Sabbath. However, I think that's good. Evoking conversation, any conversation about God's law and God's holiness and creation and our place in it is good.
Sure.
But I'm not going to look to Heschel for like my acceptability before God. Right. That's what, I'm part of Messiah's flock, and then on the we side, if it's us versus them, I don't know that if you polled everybody listening right now, they're going to have different opinions as to, like, some are going to be, yeah, Caleb, we've been in the same situation. We would have done the same thing. We would have totally gone, I knew a guy who showed up and he didn't have enough gas to get home. So I went and put gas in his tank, and then there might be people listening and said, I can't believe you did that, that. Right. I look at it like this, and we've talked about this more lately of how do our views shift and change as we get more experience in life. I think God understands that we're growing, developing, and that the things we feel strongly about in one season of our life are going to be refined and changed as we're confronted with new information, new priorities, new urgencies. And it doesn't mean our love for his law has shifted. It means that we're growing, hopefully, to be more fruitful for his kingdom as we go. And that's why I don't think we're really warned in Scripture of judging other believers.
But and ultimately what you're talking about comes back to the notion of in Judaism they say ask your local rabbi.
Yeah, what community are you networked with? Are you tied with? And that's where you go first. Don't go to I had this back and forth for a while with a guy who was strongly following a couple Orthodox rabbis, and he was like vacillating on his faith because he's like, yeah, but he had no real relationship. Right. No, he had never even talked to any of these guys on the phone or had any relationship in conversation. It was all just reading their materials. And and I'm like, well, how do you know which rabbis you even want to listen to? It's like, it's all And the problem is there is the feedback loop of just finding what itches your tickling ears. You see what I mean?
And what you're talking about right now gets into a completely different matter, which is the importance of community, right? The importance of having a community to sharpen each other. And Lee in the chat room says, I think there can be exceptions for medical professionals and law enforcement. Yeah, this gets back to the 6-day war. Israel was attacked on one of the high holy days because
Yom Kippur, yeah,
because their enemies thought, well, they won't have a standing army during Yom Kippur. This was not the case, and ultimately we need to have military, police officers, medical staff on there. Actually, at my father's community recently, I think it was last Hanukkah. Somebody actually collapsed and they had to do CPR and everything on him until the EMT got there. So, I mean, obviously having those kind of workers on staff is
hopefully it wasn't
needed.
The person eating too much
latkes.
Gelt.
My heart. Yeah. All right, let's move on because we actually have more in this category. So this was just a offhanded kind of comment on one of our videos where we were talking about the Sabbath, and I don't exactly remember what we were talking about, but Happy, Holy, Healthy Life is the handle. Commented and said, I thought the Torah said you can't travel or leave your house on the Sabbath. So
that's referring to Exodus when it had to do with the manna.
Right.
I've talked to people too that they used that passage from Exodus 16 to say, oh, you're not supposed to go because it's, you're not supposed to go out from your place.
Right.
But in my view, what we need to do is just look at the context, and it has to do with people kept going out to gather manna on the seventh day. And
right. I completely agree with you.
It's like, look, no, you're not supposed to go, you're not hearing, you store up on the sixth day and then you stay home. But that's before Sinai. That's before the promised land. I mean, so.
And not only that, but we see the example of Yeshua
going
about on the Sabbath, right? They even go through the grain fields. And so, I mean, it's not like he's staying in his place. And beyond that, what is the Sabbath called in the Torah? The Sabbath is called a Micha Chodesh, a holy gathering. And so the notion that everyone would stay in their place and not leave their place is impossible if you want to observe the commandment to gather, which I think it is a commandment. So I was hoping that was going to be quick. I think that was a sufficient enough.
Did we touch on all the points of Nelda's question? I don't remember.
So she was asking about pastor and priest. I think that we should also be able to expand this a little bit. I get this question a lot for people who are just coming into a want and understanding that they should be keeping the Sabbath. People say to me, and maybe this is where we should expand Nelda Bell's comment a little bit. They'll say to me, well, I've been working for, and actually this has happened a couple of times in this specific profession, I've been working for the post office for 20 years, and we have to work on Saturday. What do I do? There's no good answer that I can give you on this. If you have a pastor or a leader who is Sabbath observant, then I would definitely talk to them about it. But I think that also it is a process. A lot of the time we come to an understanding and we want to do it all right now. I remember in my early 20s, I decided I was going to start doing devotions because I hadn't been doing any devotions. And I decided, I should be doing, an hour or two a day. Well, that quickly went to the wayside because I had not built up to an hour or two a day of doing any devotions, and eventually I wasn't doing any again. And so the point is we start small, start and build up. And honestly, I think that when it comes to things like the Sabbath, if you've been working for 20 years, it's that can be a rough transition, not just for you, but also for your employer. And so the very first thing that we do is take it to God. We have to pray and have other people be praying for us in that regard, in terms of, asking God to have your employer have some exception, or find somebody else who can work on Saturdays, or try to work on Sunday instead, or something like that. And eventually there have been miraculous stories that I have heard of people getting Saturdays off when there was no chance that they were ever going to do that. So God does work in miraculous ways, and I think that we can take it before him. Okay, let's...
one last note on that is, because all I know is my own experience, and my own experience was, I had a job that I had to work on Saturdays. This was like in the mid 90s, when I was starting to come into that conviction. And I didn't grow up in I didn't grow up, it was new. It was all new stuff. I grew up in a traditional, I was still occasionally going to a Sunday church, but I was like, I was in that zone of conflict. We even had the pastor of that church came and visit us, and it didn't go well. Came to our home, and it ended up being that we were just under the law, and I was trying, at that point I was being I was just trying to share my love for the scripture, and trying to, I didn't know any of the languages then, I didn't understand history like I do now, of course. I was just a babe. I was a wee babe.
Yep.
I think I'm an infant now, but I was a babe then. And anyway, I remember at that same time of life, it was like, wow, my conscience was bothering me working on Shabbat.
Right.
And it was a slow process for me. And I remember going through that conversation and being nervous about it. And like, what are the consequences? I was scared, so all those things are real emotional things. Sure. But what I would encourage people who, if you're in that, is to make sure you discern, make sure it's not someone outside you telling you, you need to do this or you're not saved, or if you're responding out of pressure to, what do they call that? Like to belong to a certain group, and they're pressuring you. Like if you're feeling that, if you're feeling condemnation from a social group, if you don't behave a certain way, I would say all the more, distance yourself a little bit from that group and go back to prayer, because it might be, God's working on you to change your work schedule, and he's going to bless you as you pursue him. But you want that growth to be real growth. You want that to be real spiritual growth between you, and if you're married, your family and the Lord, not you acting out of fear of man, of acceptability by a certain group, because that's not God leading you. If you're responding out of fear of man to be accepted, the scripture warns us time and time again against fear of God versus fear of man. So right. I just wanted to share that little footnote.
So two quick things here. Number one is, I would also encourage people, if you are looking for a new job and you have been convicted to keep a Sabbath on Saturdays, that needs to be crystal clear to your employer when you're looking for a job, and then no budging on it, in my opinion. Once you say, I guess I'll work this Saturday for you because you're in a pinch, that will begin to pull on that thread, and pretty soon you'll be working on Shabbat. The second thing is somebody in the chat room says, couldn't you have bought the woman groceries after the Sabbath? Yes, I could have. However, if you have children, especially if you have babies that don't have diapers, trust me, you want diapers. I have kids, and I have 2 children in diapers right now, and not having diapers is a major problem. It is. And so I felt that it was beyond warranted. Not only that, but this the woman in question at the time didn't have any food in her house. When we realized the situation, we got called because I didn't even know the lady. We got called because somebody was desperate to help this woman, and she was it had gone down the chain a ways. We were not the first person called. So, okay. Let's move on. We're going to stay on this but shift the focus a little bit. Matthew writes in on this was also on a YouTube video. So this is a comment on a YouTube video. This is interesting. He says, anyone not keeping the seventh-day Sabbath is deceived by Satan and probably not even saved. Now, and then he quotes, and then he cites Daniel 7:25. Now, let's just go quickly to Daniel 7:25 and see what it says. It says, he shall speak. I apologize for that. Let me turn my ringer off. I thought it was.
This is the fourth kingdom, right? Is this? Start back a little earlier.
Yeah, let's start in 23. So Daniel 7:23 says, thus he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom, 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So I think the obvious, what's obviously happening here is the person who is saying this, Matthew is saying that according to Daniel 7:25, a person who doesn't keep the Sabbath is not saved. Now, ultimately, we could look at Daniel, right? We could look at the book of Daniel and we could try to exegete Daniel. But I think that this actually is, I think what I want to focus on here rather is the person is probably not saved. I think that this is actually one of the, so when the broader Christian community looks at those in the Torah movement and say these people are legalists, this is why. The notion that you can do works, and ultimately it's a bigger issue, and I know people are not going to like this, but this goes back to what I would consider the logical conclusion of Arminian theology. And the reason I say that is because if you can lose your salvation, that means that if you can do works that will make you no longer saved. So therefore, the logical counter to that is that you can do works that keep you saved and or save you. So I completely reject this. Beyond just that notion that works save you, which this person is essentially saying. This person, Matthew, is essentially saying that works save you, because if you don't keep the Sabbath, you're not saved. Ultimately, I think that, this just goes to works-based salvation. And I think this is one of the reasons that many within the mainstream Christian movement are saying, no, keeping the Torah is not, this is legalistic. It is legalistic if you think that's going to save you. We are saved by one work, and that work is the death of Christ, the death, the resurrection, and the ascension of Christ. And so I think that I think that this is a major, major theological issue. But what I was going to say, beyond all of this, there are places where I am wrong when it comes to Torah observance, when it comes to the law. There are places where this person, Matthew, is wrong when it comes to observance of the law. There are places where Rob is wrong when it comes to observance of the law. We are humans. We are not perfect. And I think it was Luther, maybe it was Calvin, who first said 30% of what I believe is not true. I just don't know what 30% it is.
That's N.T. Wright.
Well, N.T. Wright is quoting, though. I think he quotes Luther. But anyway, the point is that there are plenty of things that we do that are not going to be in line with the Torah. And if that means that we're no longer saved because we have done things against the Torah, then no one is saved. And that's a huge problem. Okay, I've spoken enough. Go for it.
Well, the passage from Daniel 7 is a good one. And, it's one to people pounce on when it comes to eschatology, because the question is, who is the fourth beast? And in the medieval rabbinic tradition, this was, remember, because this is not, quote, New Testament, this is part of the Tanakh, it was taken as Islam. It was taken by some as what they call Isa, as Rome, but also as Islam. And so it's, an ongoing thing. What exactly is this fourth beast? And the idea of changing times and law, this is not the word Torah, just so people know. This is in Aramaic. Remember, half of the book of Daniel is written in Aramaic. It's the word dat, which is from the Persian word law. And it could very well refer to, could be an Aramaic understanding that it's referring to God's law. But what's evident here, he will seek to change. He will try to change. It says it's given into his power, for this season of time. So, but we know that it's not. I don't take it as Rome. I don't take it as even the Roman Catholicism, even though Roman Catholicism might have elements of this. I don't take it as the evangelical church, trying to change, right? Because we have it even in the time of the Maccabees, right? In the 2nd century BC, we have this kind of thing happening. We have Antiochus Epiphanes, right? Trying to, get Jews to abandon the law, the tradition of their elders or their ancestors, etc. So, world rulers, imagining themselves having divine power and, trying to institute new calendars or whatever, that's going to be part of being in the world. The question is, what about the saints of the Most High? And the saints of the Most High are not rattled by that. Yeah, they're going to experience persecution, but and difficulty and immense trial and tribulation in trying to stay living faithful to God's law while in all the noise and difficulties of the situation in the world. But I just don't see justification to just hotwire this passage in Daniel 7 to the claim. All of a sudden you're talking about the Sabbath, which is not mentioned, and you're mentioning people's salvation, which is not mentioned. So in my view, that's a hotwire of an idea to a passage of scripture that it's not really called for.
So there is a lot going on in the chat room right now, and that's great. So first of all, I want to just address a couple of things. First of all, Michael says, Caleb, does it matter which version of Arminianism you are referring to? Yes, actually it does. So he says, Jacobus, Wesley, Tozer, that, or do you think they affirm the possibility of apostasy? So I agree with you that there are different flavors of Arminian theology, for sure. In fact, the Synod of Dort is really, there are those within the Arminian camp who said you can't lose your salvation. So certainly there is a difference within theology. However, I think that a lot of people today, as we are seeing in the chat room, say that you can lose your salvation, that if a person can become saved and then become unsaved. And ultimately, this comes down to works-based salvation, in my opinion. It is the logical conclusion to this theology that if you can do things that will lose your salvation, it means that your salvation is then based on works and the things that you do. And to me, that is a works-based salvation. The other thing, we have several other things going on in here. First of all, people are debating whether or not the Rome is really what's being talked about here in the what is it, the fourth horn or whatever it is in that Daniel passage. But the one that's really interesting to me here is somebody says, Paul, Leviticus 23:2 uses the English word feast in the KJV and other English translations, but the Hebrew word for feast, chag, is not used there. For the Shabbat is not a feast. Okay, I understand that the word chag is not used in reference to the Sabbath. However, it is called a Micha Chodesh, and it is listed among the holidays, the festivals.
There's only three Chagim:
Right.
Pesach, Shavuot, and
Sukkot.
Sukkot.
Right.
So there are other major festivals that are not weekly Sabbaths that are also not called Chag. So,
yeah. And finally, the last thing that I want to address here is the John 17 project says, so Caleb, how do you address the eternal sin of blaspheming the Holy Spirit, which was spoken about by Yeshua? This is a good question, and I will fully admit that I am not 100% settled on this, on what this is. However, I currently tend to lean towards my father, Tim Hagg's understanding of this. My father has written an article on the sin of the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. He contends that it was not something that is...
And it's not possible today.
It's not possible today, that it was the people who were seeing the works done by Christ in front of them and were attributing it to demons.
There was an operational temple and priesthood,
Right.
and you had optimal knowledge of Torah. Like today, you could go to your best rabbis and stuff like that. It's all imaginary. They've never seen a temple.
Right.
They've never seen the the brand new person who reads the Bible, has just as much access to everything pertaining to the temple as your most learned rabbi, right?
Yeah.
Big goose egg, zilch. And so it's only through study and learning do we start to appreciate what that is. But that wasn't the case in the first century. In the first century, you had people that in all of history should have known better.
So Mr. Young is in the chat room, and he says, the Lamb's Book of Life was written in pencil just in case we need to erase some names. This is, actually, I hear the humor, of course, in my good friend's comment. However, it brings up a good point. The names written in the Book of Life are written in blood. They are not erasable, in my opinion. And I think that is, that's spoken of in Scripture. Okay, let's move on. Let's keep going because there's actually more to this conversation. And this comes from Brandon, who is in the chat room. Brandon says this, and I don't know if he expected me to talk about this on air or not, but I think it's a good enough comment that we should talk about it, because this shows me, oftentimes we are currently in the 9th season of Messiah Matters, and this reminds me that sometimes we have people who are new and or people who have not gone through the festivals before. Some of the things that we take for granted are things that people are just now starting to look at. And so we need to remember that, and we need to continue to come back to some of the foundational elements of what we believe and why we believe them. Brandon says this. He says, in this first day, he's talking about Sukkot, by the way, and this is actually going to play into a little bit into our Sabbath discussion. But he says, in the first day, actually the day before you start counting the 7 days of the feast. So he's once again Sukkot, in which you take the boughs of the boughs of the tree. As you said, it was traditional to do it before. Yeah, so traditionally the sukkah is made in between the time of Yom Kippur and the time of Sukkot. And there's actually a good reason. I think Rob and I could probably talk for several shows about the significance of the festivals. And maybe we'll do a little bit of that here. But so the festival of Yom Kippur happens, and then we come into this festival of Sukkot. So he goes on. Leviticus 23:40 says, and ye shall take you on the first day the boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, and the boughs of thick trees, and willows of the brook, and ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. This is actually a debate among people, at least in my congregation. It has been a debate among people in our congregation. What does it mean? Because within Judaism, they're going to bring in what's called the lulav and the etrog, and they're going to bring them in and they're going to wave them in different directions to fulfill this commandment in Leviticus 23:40. And they're going to do that because ultimately what this command is saying is bring the standard branches and produce kind of things from the land that you're in. In other words, from Israel, and bring them into the Sukkah to show that you are now in the land. In other words, you're not wandering in the desert anymore. So the debate in our congregation has been, should it be these specific boughs that are talked of in this passage, or should we bring in, since we're in the Pacific Northwest, should we bring in pine cones and evergreen boughs and stuff like that? And so it's kind of a fun little debate that we have. He goes on. Also, Scripture says the festival is 7 days, and this is actually what I really want to get to here. Leviticus 23:39 says, also in the 15th day of the 7th month, when ye have, he's using the King James. I'm so not used to this, so I'm sorry if I stumble over it. When ye have gathered in the fruit of the land, ye shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. On the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. End quote from the Bible, back to Brandon. But then it speaks of the 8th day being a Sabbath. Is this Sabbath not a part of the 7 days? This is excellent. This is such a good question, and it's really, I think, actually one of the most important questions that a person can ask about Sukkot. Why? Okay, we have, there are 2 times within the Torah that we see the 8th day being really important. It is the day of circumcision. We are to circumcise males on the 8th day, and then the 8th day of Sukkot, which is not actually the 8th day of Sukkot. So we need to talk a little bit, and interrupt me at any point, Rob. We need to talk a little bit about the 8th day and the 7 days. Sukkot is actually only 7 days long, and what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to dwell in or sit in these booths, and it's supposed to remind us of the wandering in the desert, right? Well, why were we wandering in the desert for 40 years? Israel was wandering in the desert for 40 years because they rejected the covenant. And then after the 40 years, what happens? They come into the land because the next generation actually accepts the covenant, and they get baptized into the Jordan, and they come into the land. And so the 8th day is actually a sign of eternity. That is, that this earth is represented in the 7 days. So we are in a booth that is temporary and will quickly be taken down. And on the 8th day, we come into this celebration, which is representative of eternity with Christ. Interestingly, what is the sign of circumcision? I have argued, and I'm pretty confident myself, that circumcision is a sign of the virgin birth. And so we come to eat the Passover lamb, which is a representation of Christ. We have to be circumcised, which is a representation of the virgin birth, which is done on the 8th day, which also represents eternity. So when we come into the covenant through Christ, when we are saved through the blood of the Messiah, which is all represented on Passover, then we come through the Day of Atonement, and we come to this 7-day festival. And on the 8th day, because we have been entered into this covenant through the Messiah who came through a virgin birth, we are then able to come into the 8th day representing eternity. And all of these blocks fit together. All of the festival blocks are just, they fit real nicely into this perfect picture of Christ and the believers coming to Christ and being baptized, and then having that atonement made, and then coming into eternity. What have I missed, Rob?
I have nothing to add. No. No, good job. Yeah. We have a catechism, right?
Right.
And it's the yearly feast laid out, and it's repeated because we need it. We need repetition, just like it's just our human condition. We need to have renewal. When Paul says, we need to renew our minds. How do we renew our minds? What's the process of keep yourself unspotted from the world? That is laboring and meditating on God's word. That is being in fellowship with other believers who are doing the same. And back to just Sukkot specifically, the focus is on joy. He says, you'll only have joy. Well, I think it seems like a lot of people have lost, like, what does joy even feel like? Like,
Right.
what does it mean to have the joy of thy salvation? It says, right, in Psalm 51. Restore unto me, he says, King David says, restore unto me the joy of thy salvation. And that's after his sin with Bathsheba, if you go and look at that. And what is that's like a top thing, in the prophets, it says that there will be everlasting joy on their foreheads. Like, what the heck are they talking about? Like, what is this joy? And I think that at the end of the feast year, if we start, like we're talking about Pesach, where we're redeemed from sin and death and slavery, and we're taken out and we're separated from that world, and we're cleaned off, and we're washed, and we're given a new heart, right? The new heart of God's law. And then we come and recognize that while we're in this world, sin matters. And we hear that blowing of that shofar of Yom Teruah says, there is justice will be done in this world, and good will be called good, and the guilty will be condemned. And it's to stir up that fear of God, and to remember that we stand before a holy and just and righteous and amazing, beautiful, majestic, eternal creator. And we're not getting to Sukkot if we don't make it through Yom Kippur. You know what I mean? Like, we're not getting there. And so the whole process is one where we learn who the creator is, who the redeemer is, what is his heart, what is his love for us, what is his love, well, for Israel and for us as part of Israel. And so that back to that joy, we experience joy individually, and we experience joy in family, and we experience joy in community, celebrating not joys for things in the world, but joys for the things that the Father's heart, is his evaluation of what is joy. And so, I liked your point about the temporality of the sukkah, and if here again, we're going to have all, Lord willing, we'll have time to talk about this over this next year as we go through these feasts. But that's
so we got
what riffing on that.
Got a couple of things going on in the chat room. First, according to lunar Sabbath doctrine, the 8th day of the month is always a Shabbat. That's like saying, according to the Mormon doctrine, something is the Shabbat. Lunar Sabbath is absolutely ridiculous. The John 17 Project says, I have heard a teacher speaking about Sukkot, and he suggested that maybe when Messiah was born. He wasn't sure about that, but said it made sense since the feasts are about Messiah. What say you? I agree completely that the festival of Sukkot is a celebration of God coming in the form of man and dwelling with his people. John even says in his first gospel, and the word became flesh and tabernacled with his people. So I completely agree that this is what should be the focus of Sukkot. Whether or not Yeshua was born on Sukkot, I have done a lot of work on this. There's absolutely no way anybody can say that he was born on Sukkot. There is a 3-month window, both in the spring and in the fall, of when Yeshua could have been born. And this, people try to say this because of the different rotations of priests. We know what rotation Zechariah was in Luke. When he was in the temple, but that could be on any one of the festivals, and it could also be one of 2 times not on a festival time, which would have been either in the spring or the fall. And then you have very vague ideas of, and around this time, she went to go be with Elizabeth, or, how long is a gestational period for a woman? People.
Well, not only that, yes, I agree, but we also have how many times throughout the Gospels it tells us when, and it was Passover,
right,
and it was unleavened bread. Like, if we were supposed to really know it, it would just say,
right.
You know what I mean? And it was Pentecost, right? Acts chapter 2. Like, when we're supposed to know for sure, Scripture just tells us, right?
Yep.
So
I
I'm
mean,
happy with that. I'm happy with not knowing.
The fact of the matter is that I have, if people want to believe that Yeshua was born on Sukkot, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is when teachers try to put it forward as if it's fact. Like, oh, and this happens often. Oh yeah, we can calculate the days and it's obvious that Yeshua was born on Sukkot. Beyond this, you don't know if it was a leap year or not. You don't know when Sukkot was. We don't know those things. There's just not information that way. So, anyway, all of that to say, we need to go to Love is Bigger has given us a super chat. And so we are going to say thank you by doing this.
Weights and measures.
We do not get a lot of humor here, and when we do, it's wonderful.
You've been blessed.
All righty. Should we look at one more? Let's see here. Yeah, let's do one more. Okay. Michael says this. He says, you guys seem to be, this is on whether or not, this was on a video on whether or not, I think it was on the Hebrew language. He says, you guys seem to be really sure of yourselves. I believe the Hebrew language is prophetic because there's too many meanings in coincidences that aren't coincidences, if you get my point. The Hebrew language is the language God chose as he chose Israel to bring his history or his story. And so in that context, what is said and meant in that language has supernatural meaning and power. These other countries or regions co-opted and adopted language and may have taken the et, but when it's not given by God and taken by man, it would eventually get corrupted. God bless. Here's the problem, Michael, and I know that there are going to be people who disagree with this, but the major problem with this is God didn't only choose Hebrew. He chose Aramaic and he chose Greek to speak to
not only
the
that,
world.
we have in the Hebrew Bible alone. I mean, one of our good friends, Ben Noonan, Dr. Ben Noonan, did his dissertation at Hebrew Union College on the Akkadian, the Persian, the Egyptian, the Hittite, language that we find throughout the Hebrew.
And that's become a book, by the way. You can buy that book now.
Yeah, it's not a uniform language. It's the Torah was given in the language of humans.
And
God did not give Moses a design for an iPhone and how to create internet, right? It's rather he communicated. Yes, but he didn't choose Hebrew first. He chose people, and then he used the language of those people to communicate his covenant, his sovereignty, his plan for salvation to that people. It's not like he chose Hebrew first and then Israel later.
Okay, sorry, I was typing and I
How a divine significance for the et. Well, if there's a divine significance for every letter of the Torah, then the et is not special. It's just a word. You can't take one word out and say it's more special than all the other words.
Here's the thing. I don't want to.
It sounds like someone who actually. I would just wonder if this person. Have you learned Hebrew like that? And
well, that's what I was going to say. I don't want to, try to bash someone. This isn't to be mean in any way, but a comment like this tends to come from people who have not actually studied the languages or even the history of the Hebrew language or the history of the texts that we have. I would also say I'm concerned as to what teachers you're listening to. Sorry, but I got to say that. Yeah, and ultimately one of the reasons that the comment comes in this way. What does he say? He says, you guys seem to be really sure of yourselves. It's not sure of ourselves. It's that, Rob has.
We know who Messiah is.
Rob. Well, maybe
we know the Messiah.
Maybe Michael does too. But the point is that Rob has spent a significant amount of time studying and learning about language and about these specific languages. And I haven't spent nearly as much time as Rob has, but I stand on the scholarship and on the understanding of the people that have come before me, and in I would say a fairly well-learned understanding of the history of these languages and of the text. And it just seems to me that a person who would say something about Hebrew like this has not understood the full breadth of the various texts in the Bible. Daniel, the book of Daniel, actually, going back to that, hang on just a sec. Going back to the book of Daniel is actually, this book has a significant amount of loan words in it. So it's not just Hebrew. We're talking about, and part of it's written in Aramaic. And so to say that Hebrew is is this special mystical language really tends to discount part of the Tanakh. Beyond that, no matter what anyone tells you, the apostolic scriptures, that is the New Testament, was written in Greek. And God used Greek, the lingua franca of the time, to convey his words. And I think that this is
just like he used Aramaic in the time of Daniel, because in the Persian period, Aramaic was the administrative language of the Persian Empire, which was from India all the way to, like, I don't know how far west, but, all the way to the Mediterranean.
And Shlomi says something. He says, rabbinic exegesis employs the method of sod, a mystical interpretation of Torah with numerical value of Hebrew letters. I would actually correct this as well. It's not rabbinical exegesis. It's modern rabbinical exegesis. This is a modern rabbinical invention, and it's incorrect. This form of exegesis and interpretation is simply wrong, and not only is it wrong, but it's very modern. They weren't doing this in Yeshua's time. They just weren't, and they weren't even doing it up into
and Yeshua never taught this way, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, neither did the
only time
neither did the rabbis in the Mishnah. Neither did the rabbis in the Mishnah or the Talmud.
Well, they do start they do start getting into some gematria, but even the word gematria is a Greek term. So you have to realize this is the Greeks were using letters for numbers before Jews were. So it's not even a Hebrew idea. So we just got to be really careful on this. There is coded language, like in the book of Revelation, where it has numbers that represent a name. And of course, but even then you have a whole bunch of interpretations of what is the number of the beast. We've done shows on that. But the point is, even then, it is in a time, it's just to be cryptic for the sake of communicating code language, just between people who already know the code. It's not concealed, cosmic mystery to, kind of thing, in my view.
All right. That's going to do it for us today. We sure appreciate all the people in the chat room and all the conversations that's been going on. It's really interesting to watch. And if you have a chance and you're listening to this in podcast, or have a chance, go over and check out this show on YouTube, because ultimately you get to see all the wonderful people in the chat room and all of the conversations that go on. Okay. If you want to be a part of the conversation, please do so. 253-465-3205. It's 253-465-3205. Also, you can send us email, chegg@torahresource.com, chegg@torahresource.com. All righty. We'll be back next week. And this time, I think I have the actual right music to say goodbye to everybody. We hope that this conversation has done at least one thing, and that is to glorify our great God and Savior, Yeshua, the Messiah. Why? You know why? Because Messiah matters.